All right, welcome back. Hope everyone enjoyed lunch. Thank you for being with us this morning, and now this afternoon we've got a couple of really interesting sessions and then a great evening planned. So without further ado, our next session is the digital transformation, the IT/OT convergence is really the focus of what we're going to be talking about today. And we're pleased to have Justin Driscoll, President and CEO of NYPA. He's been with NYPA since 2014 in many different roles, including leading their legal and affairs. And he was appointed by Governor Hochul and the board this past summer, but he's been in the role as leading the largest state-owned public power utility in the U.S. With NYPA for the last year plus, since our chair, Gil Quinones, had moved on from that role. So we appreciate you being here today, Justin, and also a board member now of GridWise Alliance. And so thank you for your service here, and I welcome you up here. Thank you.
Thank you, Richie.
All right.
Thank you. Well, I'm delighted to be here at gridCONNEXT 2022. And I want to say, I don't know if Gil's here, but in front of the GridWise group here, I just wanted to thank Gil for his service at the Power Authority and also for putting us on the great road that we're on right now. So he's a great friend, and I know he's already doing the same at ComEd. So it's a pleasure to be with you here today to share some insights on NYPA's digitization journey. Let me begin by talking a little bit about who we are and what we're trying to achieve. We're the largest state-owned public power organization in the nation, operating 16 generating facilities and over 1,400 miles of high-voltage transmission, and more than 80% of our electricity is clean, renewable hydropower. The Power Authority is playing a major role in implementing New York State's climate agenda. New York has one of the most aggressive climate initiatives in the nation, and Governor Hochul's administration is dedicated to achieving an efficient and equitable transition to a clean energy economy. Codified into law by the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or Climate Act, New York is making unprecedented clean energy investments. And this effort includes more than $35 billion in 120 large-scale renewable and transmission projects across the state. New York has also earmarked $6.8 billion to reduce building emissions, $1.8 billion to increase solar deployment, and more than $1 billion for clean transportation initiatives. These investments have allowed us to achieve a 2,000% increase in distributed solar since 2011, and will enable the state to develop 6,000 megawatts of offshore wind by 2035. Under the Climate Act, New York will build on this progress and reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 85% by 2050, while ensuring that at least 35% of all clean energy investments are directed to disadvantaged communities. New York is also advancing progress toward the state's 2025 energy efficiency target of reducing on-site energy consumption by 185 trillion BTUs of end-use energy savings. This, of course, is not just a clean energy strategy, but a clean energy economy strategy. We understand that achieving real progress will require new insights, new attitudes, and yes, new technologies. This takes us directly to our digital journey. NYPA will take full advantage of technology and advanced analytics from the generator to the end user. And this journey enables NYPA and its customers to leverage the full potential of an advanced technology environment in every aspect of the utility industry value chain. At the heart of this journey is establishing new products and services that empower our customers to take greater responsibility for the management of their energy needs. We are reimagining our organization to operate effectively on behalf of our customers in an increasingly changing energy system. And our digital journey became even more essential as we dealt with the many levels of uncertainty during the pandemic. By incorporating next-generation technology to solve long and short-term problems, NYPA's digital adaptation has been a success for the authority and for all New Yorkers. Over the past several years, we've invested in building the infrastructure to support our digital vision and accelerating our journey to digitalization, where we can use the data to gain actionable insights for our customers. Our advancements in digitization are extensive, and it's the foundation of the build-out of a NYPA-owned and operated communications backbone network. This effort includes approximately 700 miles of optical ground wire, 500 miles of dedicated microwave network, and a dark fiber lease of approximately 1,000 miles for redundancy purposes. We are also monitoring the health of our assets in our state-of-the-art integrated smart operations center with over 124,000 data points from our critical assets across the state. This, coupled with our investment in drone and data management, is enabling us to curate important digital information, including drone captured data. And we're also utilizing artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies as part of this effort. As a result, we are detecting faults and anomalies during infrastructure inspections and avoiding forced outages, ensuring runtimes of critical generation and transmission assets. And these efforts are being noticed. For the second time, NYPA has achieved the prestigious international certification known as ISO 55001 for meeting the most rigorous power generation and transmission asset management standards set forth by the International Organization for Standardization. In fact, 3 years ago, NYPA became the first electric utility in North America to achieve this international certification for best utility operation practices. And recently, our assets have been recertified, and we're very proud of this impressive operational achievement. Now let's talk about digital innovation on a more granular level. From a digital employee's perspective, the staff having access to information at the right time is part of our strategy and our vision. We are also demonstrating our commitment to meet New York State's aggressive energy and decarbonization goals by using real-time simulation models and digital twins of the electric grid in our Advanced Grid Innovation Lab for Energy, or AGILE, to test and evaluate emerging technologies. We can model grid-scale storage, large-scale renewables, and dynamic line rating and other technology prior to deploying them in the field. These efforts will ensure our grid's reliability and resiliency and assist the state with achieving the state's climate goals. We're also growing and testing cutting-edge security solutions for viability as part of the NYPA Cyber Collective Defense Consortium in this Agile Lab. Also, our New York Energy Manager, or NIAM, is helping our customers simplify their energy management by using the power of data to improve building energy performance, reduce environmental impact, and manage energy costs. We have more than 17,000 government buildings statewide, including all major facilities, and they're taking advantage of the New York Energy Manager's advanced platform and services. This cutting-edge facility designs fully customized energy management strategies for individual facilities or entire portfolios. While these are some of the important accomplishments of NYPA in its digital journey, I'd now like to focus on the main theme of today's discussion, the integration of information technology systems with operation technology systems. Advances in technologies such as the Internet of Things and big data analytics are systematically allowing the digital information world to see, understand, and influence the physical operational world. When implemented properly, IT-OT convergence can merge business processes, insights, and controls into a single uniform environment. By allowing different technologies to integrate and interoperate efficiently as a single cohesive system, businesses can improve efficiency, reduce errors and costs, enhance workflows, and gain competitive advantages. And Convergence isn't simply a single initiative or effort. Instead, these digital activities can take a variety of directions depending on the needs and goals of a particular organization. There are three main categories of IT-OT convergence in our view. One, process convergence, which covers the convergence of workflows. Two, software and data convergence, which focuses on getting the software and data into the front office to work to address OT needs. And three, physical infrastructure convergence. This includes physical devices being converged or retrofitted with newer hardware to accommodate the addition of IT to the traditional OT environment. At NYPA, we've developed and operationalized rigorously segmented technology architectures incorporating zero trust principles and state-of-the-art cybersecurity solutions. We also continuously reevaluate the effectiveness of our controls with penetration testing conducted by external industry-leading experts. We have also deployed an enterprise-wide cybersecurity awareness program that spans both IT and OT environments to ensure that cybersecurity is baked into the culture of everything that we do. We test our readiness to respond to cyber events with numerous drills and exercises throughout the year and incorporate these learnings to continuously improve our programs and services. This is a very ambitious digital transformation, and as we approach NYPA's centennial, our new digital tools enable us to be a clean energy leader and bring tremendous benefit to New York State. We believe that these efforts will enable us to achieve substantial social and economic and environmental equity in the communities we serve. NYPA is changing the times to better serve our customers and New Yorkers. We're a national leader in energy efficiency and electric transportation, and our low-cost power helps businesses grow, creating and preserving jobs throughout the state. And since we're always seeking to improve our use of cutting-edge and digital technologies, we're bringing even greater innovation to our operations. Guided by our Vision 2030 strategy, NYPA will continue to pursue its 10-year strategy for achieving a clean energy economy. The Power Authority will extend its exceptional legacy of being a change agent for New York State's businesses, communities, and consumers. Climate change will undoubtedly influence our work in the coming decades. And as we move ahead, we will continue to make industry-leading decisions and be well-positioned for the extraordinary challenges ahead. And now I would like to segue into our panel discussion to explore the critical role of operational technology in accelerating the energy transition. We will also talk about opportunities and challenges in going fast with IT-OT convergence and digitalization of the grid. So now I'd like to welcome our panel of experts. First, Adrian Lotto. Adrian is the Senior VP of Grid Security, Technical and Operations Services at the American Public Power Association. Russell Boyer, Energy Field Director, Utility, Dell Technologies. And Mahesh Sudhakaran, General Manager of Grid Software, GE Digital. Welcome. Well, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Let me just kick it off, and maybe we could do it in order, starting with Adrian. Why is there such a big focus on IT-OT convergence in today's digital world?
Well, first and foremost, thank you, Justin, for hosting and moderating the panel. Thank you to Karen and GridWise. Really appreciate being here. Really appreciate you all asking me to come speak today. So in full disclosure, so everybody knows, Justin used to be my boss, so I agree with everything Justin just said. He got it right on the money. But even before that, I was at the United States Department of Energy for a couple of years in the Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response. So my comments will be a little bit of a blend of everything that happens inside a utility, some of the DOE perspective from a cybersecurity perspective, because I think that's also important in terms of this conversation. And then certainly last but not least, public power, APPA, where I am now, and a little bit of the challenge that public power utilities face in this arena. So I think first, Justin, to answer your question, I think IT-OT convergence has been an ongoing journey. It certainly isn't something that is happening like today. Right now, it's been a bit of a journey over the past, I'd say, 10 years or so, give or take. But I do certainly think things like, from the panel earlier today, IIJA, the digital transformation that you spoke about earlier, the way our generation and our portfolio mix is changing in the utility sector, is accelerating and advancing that IT-OT convergence, right? So whether it's, again, the Internet of Things, DERs, endpoint, the business is changing. And so as a result, we need more and more data to make sure that we are operating efficiently, creating controls, understanding the data points, and then responding accordingly from a demand response perspective. I think we're going to talk a little bit more about challenges later on, but that certainly does bring about some of the challenges you talked about, right? All of these data points then have data that is feeding into the utility. And so understanding how are we going to manage all of that? How do we standardize all of that? How do we run analytics against all of that and understand all of that while our digital footprints are growing, changing, and advancing, I think is kind of the key to the innovation that's happening around IT-OT convergence.
Great. Russell?
Well, so from a Dell technology perspective, we believe in human progress through technology. And one of the things that I find fascinating is that on the IT side, there's always been this, focus on data and basically taking data insight and turning it into, benefits for the organization. On the OT side, the operations is critical. But what I've learned is that, as we start to invest in the edge and in the IoT, we've got to figure out how to put these common or standard platforms that can take that data and turn it into insight so that we can be able to achieve these, aggressive energy targets. So I think it's really about the IT-OT convergence, about taking the benefits of both and being able to put it into standard platforms that we can accelerate the deployment.
Mahesh?
Thank you, Justin. When I look at IT and OT, I always have a bit of a chuckle because if I just look back on my career, I've had an opportunity to spend a decade and a half with Schneider Electric. Then I had an opportunity to spend a decade plus with IBM. So I've been on the IT and the OT side pretty much equally. So based on the day you ask me, I don't know which I like more. But if you go back, if I really simplify IT and OT convergence is nothing but data meets physics. Right? That's the easiest way I look at it because you have the operational technologies that they run the grid. And then you have the IT technologies which have traditionally been more towards the customer side, customer management. Now what is happening with energy transition, you cannot differentiate an IT system or an OT system. These systems share data. All the data that you require to manage energy transition comes from the OT systems. And they have to interlink with all the customer systems that you have to actually get to value for our customers for all the use cases around EV charging, or if you're trying demand side management and all of that. So IT-OT convergence is not an option anymore, right? It's something that we'll have to really accelerate because that's how in utilities you get to value. Again, if you look at these systems, they're fundamentally designed differently. Like IT systems tend to be a lot more standardized. So you buy standard packages, but when you come to the operational technology systems, they tend to be a lot more bespoke. So those are systems that are bespoke, have a lot of requirements that have gone in. They're not built to change, they're built to last. Right? I'll repeat, they're not built for change, they're built to last because they run the grid. Right? So what happens is they tend to be really blocked, or they're campus systems. They don't talk to any other systems. They're fit for purpose, and they are secured by design. But these systems now with energy transition have to talk to all other systems. So these campus systems need to get exposed. So now going back, OT and IT need to come together. So it's a very interesting space that we're getting into because we have a lot of innovation happening on the IT side, which can be carried towards the operational technologies to make them world-class, right? But again, you have to understand data and you have to understand physics for this to really work. So that's the reason I'm excited.
Mahesh, let me stay with you for a second. What do you see as the biggest benefits, challenges, and maybe even risks around the IT-OT convergence?
So the biggest benefit, I think, is purely from a value perspective, right? Because and value and innovation. There's a lot of innovation that's happening in the IT side around AI, machine learning, automation, and there's a whole ecosystem of partners who know how to do this at scale. A lot of that can come into the operational technology side to really modernize things, because these things are currently monoliths to some extent. So modernizing is something that we can learn a lot from the IT systems. What are the challenges that I see? The thing that keeps me awake is cybersecurity. Like, these systems are not designed to be exposed to the world. Right? Everything I've seen with ransomware in the past few weeks and months and years is these systems are not designed for that. That's just a fact. Now, how do you secure these systems at scale is the challenge that all of us are dealing with right now. And that's something that IT and OT coming together is something that we always have to look out for. And the last thing is, if I have to look at one more area, is governance. How do you govern these systems across IT and OT? Because the people who manage these systems tend to be different. They tend to have different skill sets. They bring different capabilities to bear. So how do you govern this across IT and OT is an important dimension to look at.
Adrian, maybe we could jump to you. Question around, it always comes down to people, right? Question around people, process, technology in the context of the IT-OT convergence.
So I'll just build on with what Manesh just said, right? I think he's spot on in his comments that they are different groups of people. So traditionally inside a utility, you have your COO, right, whose job it is to operate that plant, usually supported by a team of engineers, and their goal is to keep that plant running efficiently and effectively no matter what, keep the lights on. May or may not be talking to your CISO and CIO team, right? That is a different skill set of usually cybersecurity professionals and CIO individuals that have just a different skill set, a different, usually on the IT side, are really working on processes within the business itself. And unfortunately, quite often the two don't really connect, right? So, inside NYPA, I think one of the things we worked very hard on is bringing those cyber professionals together with those OT professionals, not just under like the NERC standards, SIP 13 and others, but more so on a day-to-day basis to understand as the grid evolves, how do we continue to closely work together? Oftentimes, when I see it from a process perspective, you'll see boards of, whether it's a board of trustees or depending on how the utility is set up, your COO usually reports up to a guy like you, Justin, and then up to that board. But you won't see, generally speaking, the chief operation, you won't see a role of a chief operating technology officer reporting up to a board. It's usually only a CISO or a CIO. That generally falls within the bailiwick of your COO to report operational issues. So I think even from a governance perspective at the highest level, at the boards, there's a bit of a gap there. So even thinking through for the executives in the room, well, how do I ensure that when I'm talking to my board, that I'm actually informing them about the threat and the risks on the cyber side or on the digital transformation side, both from an IT and OT perspective, so they understand where we're going, and what we're going to do to ensure that they're talking together. So I think those are just from really process ways, kind of things to think through as we continue to evolve. And I think my guess is more and more and more, you're going to start to see that role of chief operating technology officer start to pop up and get created, but maybe even a chief innovation officer or something like that you'll start to see kind of popping up in the industry.
Yeah, and we have specific examples of large utilities that have, under their CIO, have a grid infrastructure and have an IT infrastructure, and they're really trying to bring the organization together to be able to deliver those benefits that we've been talking about. So from a people standpoint, it's different skill sets from the IT and the OT, and you've got to be able to put them in a single organization so that they can learn for like the value of virtualization, for example. That's something that we've been championing as moving virtualization into the OT side of the operations. And, you know, there's some resistance sometimes. I mean, I will tell you, frankly, I've had conversations with some operations folks that says you're never going to virtualize any of my, applications or any of my workloads in the substation, and that's the end of the story. So then how do you overcome that? How do you overcome that? And I think it's a lot about the people in the sense that you had talked about. It's about educating them and understanding that there's a new, innovation that's about to occur, and that, you know, there's a new skill set and a new opportunity that you can present them, and now they understand that this is how it's going to work, or this is how the benefits is going to benefit them. So, for example, one of the things that I get a lot of comments that, you mean I can manage all of that remotely? Okay, I can upgrade all of that remotely. I can monitor it remotely. You mean I can manage all of my security remotely? Yes. So those are the kind of benefits that you have to share so that you can get that buy-in, from the organization to move forward. And I think also from a process perspective, you talked about a lot of engineering-specific systems. There's a lot of I would say this is the way it's always been. And so you've got to figure out how to create a safe place to do innovation, right? So that everybody on board, all the stakeholders can get together and start doing some testing so that they can understand what this process is going to look like, so that they can get the buy-in and get on board, and then ultimately be a part of that solution and that innovation that needs to occur.
Sort of helping them see that the innovation is going to make their job easier to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if I could add to that point, it's a very different mindset across the two bodies, right? If you look at the classic IT or the CIO, they tend to be very close to the technology and innovation, so they understand AI, machine learning, automation, and all the latest and greatest that's coming out, because the IT world changes every 6 months. There's something new all the time. On the other hand, if you look at the OT value, they are running the grid, right? So that is the core responsibility, to run the grid, right? So they're not very keen about features and capabilities. They want to solve the problem. So unless you're able to translate the capabilities of technology to solve a problem of managing a grid or orchestrating a grid better, the language does not resonate. So we have the privilege of managing 30% of the world's grids, and this is a theme that constantly comes across. So I need my power systems people to talk to the OT people, and then we have our folks from technology who talk to the CIO. Even within my organization, who tends to have both, I find it difficult to drive the synergy, because one talks physics, one talks bits, right? And trying to combine the two is a work in progress. I think there's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah. And one example is I had a client recently who was saying, can you make it just like it was? And I was like, that's an interesting dilemma. Can you make it just like it was? And what he meant by that is they were used to buying an appliance. Okay, hardware, software services, and it was an easy process for them. And now what you're asking them to do is to get into the details of all the technology of the hardware and the software and the applications and all of that. And they're like, that's difficult. That basically the client is telling you that's difficult for me to do that. I'm used to just buying it all from one vendor and it all being integrated and tested and
Just to defend our operators, the thing is, there's times when I struggle with technology, right? Yeah. I'm in the technology business, but technology is constantly changing, and I struggle a lot. Imagine the operators who's being forced to learn new things.
Yep.
Their job is to run the grid. So there's a huge enablement and training piece that has to go along, right? And the talent does not exist. The operators are not available, right? You're not able to replace. There's a large-scale aging issue there. So this is a lot more complex than just IT and OT, right? There's a huge people dimension that Adrian just mentioned, right? How do you train these people on new technology? And that is the gap.
Yeah. Russell, coming back to you, are there different levels of convergence that you've seen? Is it an all or nothing proposition, or do some companies go halfway?
I still think it's a crawl, walk, run. You're asking different organizations to look at these targets that we've got 10 years in the future and start working on them today. Well, we've got to get them to at least move, okay, in the direction of being able to modernize the platform. And in order to get them to move in that direction, you have to educate them, okay? You have to invest in some training and some, to be able to get them even on board. And then once they're on board, the next phase, and I don't know how many you've experienced this, but I mean, we have at least like 20 different, pilots, POCs going on, and those go for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. So I'm thinking, how long is this testing going to have to go on? And if we're going to have to do that for every single utility, how are we ever going to meet these targets? Because every utility is going to say, no, I'm going to do my testing. And the next utility is going to do their testing. Well, how do we come together as an industry and do testing through, our associations and our labs that can help to accelerate that deployment? Or otherwise, I'm concerned that we're not going to meet those targets just because of the sheer, process that's been put in place over years and years that this is the way we have to do it. So we're going to have to figure out how to innovate in that area.
Any other thoughts on that, on the level of convergence?
No, go ahead.
No, I didn't. Go ahead.
So it's not, I mean, what you're talking about to me is a bit of what their risk appetite is around this, right?
Sure.
And so, it is very true. I mean, the risk appetite in the utility sector is low. And I think to your point about IT changes every 6 months. But that's not what the sector is built upon. The sector is built upon reliability and resiliency of the electric grid, period. That's what they get judged upon. That's what regulators are looking for. So there's also a difference in terms of risk acceptance there. By moving towards this digital platform, you are asking them to take on more risk. And oftentimes, some of these aspirations are fundamentally thrust upon them and depending on where you sit on the aisle on these things, but you spoke about clean energy goals, right? So oftentimes it's a state initiative that's driving clean energy goals, whether you agree with them or not, that then force these fundamental changes in technology. So, it is a change. It's change management, it's risk management, it's a change in the risk profile. And I think they're slow to accept it. I mean, I think, but one could balance that against the reasons why, right?
Sure.
So,
Sure.
I'm sure you all saw the news in North Carolina, I guess yesterday, the grid went down and it's under, investigation. So, not a whole lot coming forth about that, but again, makes national headline news due to a physical impact to the grid. Potentially it's sounding like by reports some shooting, but nonetheless, the impact of course makes national headlines. So why wouldn't they be risk adverse to taking on, right, this type of exposure? And I think that's the balance, and that's the crux of the convergence of IT/OT reluctance.
And that's fair. That's fair. I would say though, from a cyber security standpoint, they're already at risk.
Oh, I would agree with that.
So in the end, the do nothing approach can't really get us to the goal.
Yeah.
So what we have to do is we have to figure out, okay, at the same time we're innovating, we address the fact that, okay, cybersecurity is going to be a risk. It's a risk today in our current systems, and as we put more digital, technology in the field, yes, it will be a risk, but we will need to make sure to address that up front so it's not an obstacle that we can't innovate.
That's right.
And Justin, if I could just add to that, right? Because, and I want to really look at it from a positive. This is not all gloom and doom, right? I think one of the things that's happening is utilities knew what they wanted in an OT system. They knew exactly what they wanted. The requirements were extremely clear. They're more clear than I ever wanted them to be. But it was very clear on what an OT system is. Everybody knew what an ADMS is, what they want from it, what an EMS is, what a GIS is. But as we get into energy transition, right, the requirements are not known. Right? Requirements are constantly changing. So this is a time where there has to be a lot of innovation that has to go into an OT system. So the inflection point is like about now. So, and all the innovation has to come from the IT domain, right? So will IT and OT converge? If you would ask me a few years back, I'd have said all the same things that it's true. But what we are seeing is there's an inflection point starting to emerge. Because now you cannot just build your bespoke system. You have to build a system that's not just built to last, but it's a system that's built to change, built to adapt, right? And for that, IT/OT is like a foundational principle. And that is the reason I'm hopeful, right, that we're going to change. And innovation will start to bleed in from IT to OT side. And a lot of the technologies that Russell spoke about are very relevant, because that's how you're going to get to scale.
Yeah, I would think the key word is flexibility. I think, we've got to figure out how to get to flexible systems that can support requirements that we don't yet know we need, but we have to have a place for those innovations to land within the operational systems.
Yeah, and if I could also add, right, like the data in the OT systems is so critical for energy transition. Look at every single use case, either you're looking behind the meter, around the meter, in front, back, depending what part of the meter you're part of, or else you're looking at EV charging. All the data that's required to balance these systems come from OT systems, right? So how does this data get exposed in a secure, federated manner? All of that comes from IT systems, right? So I think I'm seeing leading utilities have the CIO function and the COO function now collaborating a lot more. Some of them have also gone far ahead, wherein some of the functions in the OT domain are actually reporting into the CIO, right? And there's a lot of learning that's coming from other industries. I'm seeing a lot of utility CIOs are coming in from other industries now, so they're bringing that learning into the business. So the net is, it's an inflection point now, and I think it is going to accelerate.
What's the customer reaction been, Russell and Mahesh?
If the customer reaction has been that of hope, right? Because the thing is, everybody knows this has to be done, but the biggest challenge is there's a huge education and change management element attached to it. Because end of the day, the CIO can take a decision, the chief operating officer can take a decision. End of the day, if you don't enable and train your operator who's going to interact with the system every day, it's going to be a failure, right? So how do you upskill the operator? That is where the tire meets the road. And also, one of the other things are the systems need to look like IT. All the OT systems need to start looking like IT systems. Where all the young, early career people are coming in, they'll look at the iPhone or whatever the Android device is. Why doesn't my display look like that? Why can't I have the search function? Right? So a lot of the new early career employees coming into utilities are informing this change. Right? So it's a pressure from both sides.
Yeah, and I would say one of the champions I've found within the utilities are the innovation centers. So every utility, like you had mentioned, NYPA has these innovation centers, and they're focused a little further out, right? They've got their eyes set on the next 2, 3, 5 years out, and they can help to really influence and overcome some of the objections that occur within the organizations, within the utilities, because, they're on the same team. Right? They're on the same team. They're just focused a little bit different in their, the time horizon. And so that's how I've tried to kind of leverage and manage those objections, is to say, hey, can you talk to your innovation team? Because they've been working on this, and it really, ties into what you've been talking about and what we've been talking about. Why don't we collaborate on that, and then you can learn along the way and use all the resources that you already have in your own organization.
And do you talk about like long-term cost savings that this Convergence is going to bring?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's one of the things that honestly we've been working on as various models to be able to quantify the ROI of modernizing a substation, for example, because I feel like that's a conversation that's really more at the CFO level. At some point, we've got to quantify what this energy transition is going to mean from a dollars perspective. What is the investment? What's the return on that investment? And then what are the operational benefits? And so it's a little bit of a stretch, to be quite honest, sometimes, because we're coming from an IT kind of perspective, and now we're in the OT world, and now we're trying to actually quantify those benefits to convince the organization to move forward. But we do have a few models. One of the things that I've found is with every pilot, we always get data that we can then leverage and say, okay, this is just an example, one example of what the benefits might be, from a reduction in, you know, O&M cost, a reduction in the number of devices to maintain, a reduction in the number of failure points, and then that's what gets the attention, you know, engagement from the organization.
I know in working with Mahesh and his company in the past, we've found actual identifiable savings because we've been able to spot abnormalities in the equipment and then go out and repair it before we're facing a forced outage. So we're able to actually quantify the benefits, which I think is a great story.
Proactive instead of reactive.
Absolutely right. And one of the things that I also want to bring out the point is when we work together was the aspect of collaboration and co-innovation. Because with energy transition, there's nobody who, like, I'll be the first person to say this, nobody has the complete answer. Everybody has a part of the answer. So this is team sport at scale, right? So collaboration, co-innovation is so critical to develop the products and capabilities that energy transition requires. So that aspect is something that I wish people do more of. Because when you're trying to innovate, collaborate, the first thing that you have to accept is you don't know, right? And not accepting that they don't know what the requirement looks like is uncomfortable for a lot of people, right? And including us, right? You're coming into discussions where you don't have the answer. So building trusted partnerships for collaboration and co-innovation are going to be critical for us to be successful as we go forward.
No, not everybody is the same size and scale, right? And so as companies embark on this journey, are there best practices that are associated with certain scale size companies?
So a few, right? I'm like, the first thing, you have to be a learning organization. So how does the organization invest in ensuring that the teams are getting trained on a regular basis, both across IT and the new operational technology? So becoming a learning organization is an important step. The other thing that I think Russell talked about is a lot of the utilities are creating their own innovation centers where they're giving an opportunity for both the IT organization and the OT organization to get a taste of what the future looks like. So that's what I call a penalty-free environment wherein you can actually go and test, and if you find it valuable, then it can go through that intermediate step of innovation into production. So I think setting up innovation centers is a good way to drive more adoption. And the third thing is, I think, it goes back to culture, right? And like organizations that tend to be learning in nature tend to be more successful and more accepting, because nobody has the answer. This is team sport now, right? You're expecting a vendor to come and solve your challenges. That is not the entire solution.
Russell,
I would
thoughts
say-
on best practice?
I would say it's really about collaboration. I think it's collaborating at all levels in the sense that you've got to create a coalition of the willing, okay, that wants to go in this direction, and then you've got to figure out what all the stakeholders can bring to the table, and then you've got to create an environment, an innovation center or a lab to be able to prove this out, to get everybody, you know, comfortable with it, and then you've got to deploy. And, you know, I think there was a speaker earlier that was talking about deploy, deploy, deploy. I thought that was a good quote. I feel like, you know, GridWise has done a great job of influencing. I think we've got a lot of funding out there, but we've got to figure out, how do we deploy? How do we accelerate the deployment? What is the best practice that the industry is comfortable with to be able to accelerate the deployment? And I think that's the big challenge.
Great. Adrian, you have a unique perspective at APPA. From your vantage point, what do you see? What are you seeing out there, and what would you like to see more of?
So I think APPA, our members are unique, right? We have very large customers, large members like you, NYPA, and then very, very small clients where you only see, or members that only have a couple of people running an actual manual grid. So I think the challenge from a public power perspective is what we were just talking about. How do you take, and this is exactly, so we are actually currently working with the U.S. Department of Energy on 2 cooperative agreements around OT cybersecurity, OT deployments on sensing data. And the business model, or the reason why, the way we intend to do this is we're fundamentally partnering with a coalition of the willing, some of our larger public power members, to take those learnings and then be able to distribute them and to the rest of the membership, right? Around what are some of the best practices around OT. So I think more of that, to the point you were raising around collaboration, I think is critically important. And then we spoke about this a bit earlier, but again, from a public power perspective, I think what remains a challenge and an ongoing challenge is the business case, as you spoke about earlier. I mean, some vendors kind of, they are for-profit businesses. So they look at the coalition of the willing, the bigger guys, the IOUs with much deeper pockets in some cases. And then they look at public power and frankly don't, from a business perspective, put the effort in or want to partner with some of our member utilities. So how do we, again, help in terms of taking the learnings from some of those, that coalition of the willing, apply them to some of our smaller members, right? So I think that the business side is an ongoing challenge. And last but not least, I would say, again, back to the cyber side of the house, I think, the threat has continued to evolve. The cybersecurity threat has continued to evolve. And we have seen, unfortunately, that the IT systems are often targeted, whether it's, oddly enough, maintenance data, safety data, data that then the adversary uses to impact operational technology or actually cause physical impacts to the grid using physics. And so I think the issue there is that we have to ensure that we're continuing to message and help public power members that are of all different sizes remain cyber secure and understand the threat, so that they can understand the impact and why certain data, back to data governance, needs to be protected, how it needs to be managed. Because oftentimes, people think, well, it's just maintenance records, what's the big deal? Or it's just, right, like, what's the big deal? So I think that continuous learning are some of the best practices we want to continue to push forward in public power particularly.
Great. We have a little extra time. Should we take some questions? Any questions in the audience for our panel members?
Taking the prerogative of the host to ask the first question, but you started to touch on it, Adrian, which is when your OT systems were islanded, what you worried about with the IT system was, stealing your PID, your personal information, your customers' data. But is there a way now that you have to think differently about the actual, you were talking about why protect certain data, but is there a way that you think about protecting the access to your systems now that it's not just about stealing people's social security numbers, but about destroying equipment?
I think that's been the ongoing dialogue in terms of security for quite some time now, right? Is how do we make this digital transformation of the future while keeping the IT system and the OT system separate and secure in a way, but knowing that this convergence is naturally happening. So that is the key. That is the issue that remains ongoing. I think we've talked about a lot of data governance, data management, understanding, who our vendors are, right? I think that also remains a challenge because when you're working in the digital transformation space, you're often partnering with new vendors, some startups. EV charging is one example of that. There's a lot of new faces in the game, if you will, in terms of who you're going to partner with. And so ensuring that you are robustly understanding who those vendors are, to the extent you can, understanding the supply chain associated with those vendors, ensuring best practices on the actual system regarding IT and OT. I think those are some of the best practices, but
So I would give a specific example for that. So we're working with a large utility, has a distribution intelligence project. And one of the things that they identified early on is a lot of the legacy protocols are insecure. They're not secure. So while, as long as you can grab the wire, as long as you can get onto that network, you can control those assets. And so that was their concern, right? So what they've been doing is basically putting devices out in the field to minimize the threat vector, to basically make it as short as possible from that legacy protocol to that asset in the field, and then and move to a much more secure communication from those devices all the way back to the control center. So that's a project that we're actively working on, and I think that's a perfect example of where the utility's like, we are vulnerable, there are risks, okay? We're used to those risks and we're comfortable with those risks, but there are risks, and what can we do to make our distribution grid more secure?
And if I could add to that, right, the utilities understand safety and reliability from an OT perspective really well, because that's their license to operate. From a cybersecurity perspective, the big change that cybersecurity is never done. It's a journey that you're always on, and it's about staying ahead. So you can't just say, I've executed a project, I'm secure, end of story. It is about being on the journey constantly. And being in the journey constantly, that is the part that some utilities understand and are able to stay ahead, whereas others have a bit of a learning curve, right? And trying to find the right balance is extremely important, because cybersecurity is not going away. You've got state and non-state actors coming into this, and utilities, given the critical nature, will be attacked, are under attack. So how do you stay ahead? And as we get to energy transition, all these OT systems are required to talk to systems that are IT systems. So I think in a decade from now, you will not be able to differentiate much between an IT and an OT system. The OT systems will start to look like IT systems. Mm-hmm. So then how do you protect? Mm-hmm. Right? Those are all real challenges that we all have to face together.
Yeah. Good point.
Any other questions? All right, well, I'd like to thank our panel for this great discussion. Was there one question? Sorry, I didn't see it, sorry.
To the panel, hello, Adrian. Good to see you all. I'm curious because Adrian, I think brought this voice somewhat, but as someone who's been involved on the front lines in trying to deliver that innovation for a group of utilities, one of the biggest challenges we've had to do is take a step back, and foundationally with regards to data management is utilizing something along the lines of a common information model. Mm-hmm. No disrespect to any of you vendors, but the burden on an individual utility is already having a hard time hiring the people they need to hire to engage in the kind of work you've been talking about. That adoption of a common information model, just as one strategy, some kind of curation that allows us to test quickly in a secure fashion among vendors, because every time we manage it, it takes a lot of work. So I didn't hear that per se. I didn't quite hear if that was something that you think makes sense. And then secondly, the kind of tools and the innovation we're talking about demands capital investment, and the investment structure for capital investment and the money, the way it does not track a lot of the investments we're talking about. So two things. One, if you would please react to the common information of that type of broad data curation to get to one language, one source of truth for information. And then secondly, on the investment model, I'd be grateful. Thank you.
Well, I absolutely agree to that. The common information model is something that's essential, and I think all the vendors need to work together to get to one they can agree with. And I think the standards bodies need to play a role here, because I think it's not just the vendors who are going to go solve it. Given an opportunity, every vendor would try to do what suits them best, right? So I think this is where the standards body coming in and help defining a standard, which we all can participate, is going to be important. On the second dimension of capital, absolutely, right? And a lot of the capital allocation, capital tracking is essential for innovation projects, and there's no clean way to do that today. So both of your points are spot on.
Yeah, and I would say, we've been supportive of several open source initiatives that have started with the common information model to really bring all of the various parties together to kind of prove out some of the capabilities without having to be, aligned to one specific vendor. So we've been a big champion of that. And then I would also say, from a funding perspective, I've always felt like that if you can get that coalition together, okay, there's a group of funding that if everybody contributes a little bit, they're going to always get a lot back out of the investment. So I feel like that's important, is to get that coalition, figure out, pool the resources, and then be able to invest in that innovation, and then everybody can benefit.
But I think, I'll just add to that, I think since we're in the Beltway here in DC, the other player in the game here, right, is the federal government. And I think, and I can say this because I'm not there anymore. So I think my, at DOE, Caesar, whether it's supply chain and the coalition of the willing, there needs to be some sort of, I question whether or not the vendors will do it of their own accord. With all due respect, what's in it for you guys?
Sure, exactly.
Nothing. So, but that doesn't mean the need isn't there from the utility side, right? And I think the need is there. The regulators are signaling that the need is there. The USG is signaling that the need is there. So, how do we bridge that gap, right? And I think just like we're bridging the gap between IT, OT, how do you bridge the gap to start speaking the same language when regulators are fundamentally asking utilities to do certain things, but you're not regulated by that same body, right? Yeah. So I think there's more to come on that. But I think there's some role there for, I just don't know that the vendors will do it without some sort of other convening authority or some sort of additional regulation. I don't know. We'll see.
I feel very positive. I think given that the electricity market, right, we're all in the business of electricity. Electricity normally tends to be the same around the world, right? So given how the physics works, there has to be a way to standardize it. So it's not just the market that's the US, but also the market around the world, because everybody's dealing with the same commodity. And managing the commodity has got very standard principles. So there's no reason to not have that. But again, I think this is a role where standard bodies come into play a lot. And they are the ones who can bring us all together. And there is definitely an appetite to go do that. It saves vendors a lot of time integrating. It is in the vendor's interest to go do it, right? Because the amount of time it takes to do common interface and integration is a big challenge, and it affects time to value for projects, right? Imagine we could just connect and it worked, and we didn't have to do language translation of the 100 different protocols that are there.
Yep. No, I would definitely say that standards, it's the focus on trying to define those standards that the whole industry can align on, especially influencing standards that may have been put in place under a lot of prior assumptions. We've got to upgrade and update those so that they can incorporate the latest technology.
And I think and there's a lot of learning from the IT side, right? Because the IT side has done a good job in using open source community to standardize. I think a lot of that learning can come into the OT side to really help and scale.
Well, on that note, I see we're at time. So again, I want to thank our panel for this great discussion, and thank you for listening.
Thank you.